The Smith family offered $100,000 for answers about their missing son. 20 years later, they're still searching. George Smith IV vanished from his Royal Caribbean honeymoon cruise, leaving behind only questions and blood. Please like, subscribe, and share. George Allen Smith IV was born on October 3, 1978, in Greenwich, Connecticut, into a family that embodied the American dream. His parents, George Sr. and Maureen, had built something remarkable from the ground up. Their family business, Costco Liquors, operated successfully for 38 years and became a cornerstone of the Greenwich community. The liquor store wasn't just a business. It was a gathering place where everyone knew each other. The Smith family had created an atmosphere that brought the community together, fostering relationships that lasted decades. George grew up surrounded by this warmth and familiarity, watching his parents serve their neighbors with genuine care and dedication. Despite having everything a child could want, George wasn't spoiled. His parents instilled strong values in him, teaching him the importance of hard work and humility. He lived simply, understanding that privilege came with responsibility. After graduating from Greenwich High School, George pursued his education at Babson College in Massachusetts, where he studied business with the same determination that characterized everything he did. Following college, George moved to Boston and established himself as a computer data mining analyst. The work was competitive and demanding, but George thrived in the fast-paced environment. His intelligence and analytical mind made him successful in his field, and he quickly built a reputation as someone who could solve complex problems with innovative thinking. However, despite his success in Boston, George felt drawn back to his roots. The family business that had shaped his childhood was calling him home. He made the significant decision to leave his promising career in data analysis and return to Greenwich. This wasn't a step backward. It was a deliberate choice to carry on his family's legacy. George began learning every aspect of running Costco Liquors from his father. He studied the business operations, customer relationships, and community connections that made the store successful. His father taught him not just about selling liquor, but about serving people and maintaining the trust the family had built over nearly 4 decades. At 26, George Smith IV had everything to live for. He was intelligent, driven, and surrounded by a loving family. He had a clear path forward and the foundation to build upon his parents' success. Little did anyone know that his story was about to take a devastating turn. But George's life was about to change forever when he met someone who would become both his greatest love and potentially connected to his mysterious fate. In 2002, George's life took a romantic turn when he met Jennifer Hagel at a social gathering. Jennifer was a first-grade teacher who had lived in Connecticut her entire life, bringing stability and warmth to her relationship with George. From their first meeting, they connected on a deep level, with friends describing them as like 2 puzzle pieces that were meant to fit together. Their courtship lasted 3 years, during which Jennifer became beloved by George's entire family. She was described as gorgeous, young, and driven, possessing qualities that complemented George perfectly. The Smith family welcomed her with open arms, seeing how she made George whole in every way. Their relationship brought out the best in both of them. The couple's wedding was nothing short of a fairy tale. They chose Castle Hill Inn for their ceremony, selecting a venue with a beautiful water view that reflected their shared love of the ocean. The celebration was filled with joy, surrounded by family and friends who had watched their love story unfold over the years. For their honeymoon, George and Jennifer chose a 2-week cruise with Royal Caribbean International. The itinerary was ambitious and romantic, featuring stops throughout the Aegean Sea, including Greece, Turkey, Italy, and other Mediterranean destinations. They were excited to explore these historic locations together as newlyweds. On June 29th, the couple departed from Barcelona aboard the MS Brilliance of the Seas. They were ready to enjoy their first days as husband and wife, anticipating romantic sunsets, delicious cuisine, and the adventure of discovering new places together. The cruise represented the perfect beginning to their married life. Everything seemed perfect as they sailed into the Mediterranean. George and Jennifer had found their soulmate in each other, had the support of loving families, and were embarking on what should have been the trip of a lifetime. However, this honeymoon would not be romantic or dreamy. Instead, it would become a nightmare that would ruin George's family forever. 11 days into their marriage, on what should have been a perfect morning at sea, a passenger's glance out her window would reveal something that would change everything. July 5, 2005, began like any other morning aboard the MS Brilliance of the Seas. Passengers were waking up to what they expected would be another beautiful day at sea. However, around 8 o'clock in the morning, A passenger on deck 7 looked out her window, expecting to see the harmonious blue sea and yellow sun that had greeted her every day of the cruise. Instead, she spotted something that made her blood run cold. A red smudge stretched across the ship's canopy, seeming to go on forever. The dark stain was unmistakable, and she immediately understood that something terrible had happened. Without hesitation, she alerted the cabin crew about what she had witnessed. Panic spread through the cruise ship as crew members realized the horrifying truth. Someone had fallen overboard. The captain immediately initiated emergency protocols and made his way to cabin 9062, the room registered to Jennifer and George Smith. What the captain discovered when he entered the cabin painted a disturbing picture. The room was in complete disarray, with everything thrown on the floor and the bed in chaos. Most unsettling was an odd chair positioned against the glass railing next to the balcony. The chair's placement seemed deliberate, as if someone had used it to climb onto the railing. An investigation of the balcony revealed a hip impression on the glass, suggesting someone had been perched on the railing very close to the ship's edge. This physical evidence indicated that someone had indeed been in a precarious position on the balcony. The blood evidence throughout the scene was extensive and telling. 2 noticeable red marks were found on the sheets, each approximately 2 centimeters long. Laboratory tests later confirmed that this blood belonged to George. Additional blood was discovered in various locations throughout the cabin, and more was found on the ship's awning below the balcony. The red trail of evidence painted a clear picture. Something violent had occurred in cabin 9062 on deck 7. The blood pattern led from inside the room to the balcony door, indicating a struggle or incident that resulted in someone going overboard. The search for the cabin's occupants yielded shocking results. 26-year-old George Smith IV was missing, presumably having fallen into the Mediterranean Sea. Meanwhile, Jennifer was found calmly receiving a pre-planned massage at the ship's spa, seemingly unaware of the crisis unfolding. When the captain and crew informed Jennifer that her husband had gone missing, she appeared shocked and worried. She told them she hadn't seen George since the night before, adding another layer of mystery to an already complex situation. As Turkish police boarded the ship to begin their investigation, Jennifer's behavior would raise the first of many disturbing questions about what really happened during those final hours. The investigation into George's disappearance required reconstructing the events of July 4th through witness testimonies and security footage. What emerged was a complex web of relationships and decisions that led to a tragic conclusion. Jennifer explained to investigators how they had quickly befriended Josh Askin, a 20-year-old American passenger they met immediately upon boarding the cruise ship. The threesome had spent the first 4 or 5 days together, enjoying the cruise experience to its fullest. They ate delicious food at the ship's restaurants, explored fascinating towns during port stops, and genuinely seemed to enjoy each other's company. The fateful evening began innocently enough. According to Jennifer, they decided to visit the ship's casino, where she played poker while Josh and George had fun at other gaming tables. The night involved heavy drinking, and George experienced significant poker losses that may have affected his mood and judgment. From the casino, the group moved to the ship's disco, where the evening took several concerning turns. Security footage provided crucial timeline information, showing George's last confirmed sighting in the casino around 2:30 in the morning. This footage would become vital evidence in understanding his final hours. However, when investigators questioned Josh Askin, troubling discrepancies emerged in the stories. Josh's account revealed that Jennifer and George did not leave the disco together as initially suggested. More disturbing was Josh's observation that Jennifer was getting comfortable with Lloyd, the casino manager, even in front of her husband of just a few days. The timeline became clearer through keycard records and witness testimony. Jennifer departed from the disco around 3:30 in the morning, leaving George with his new friends. Meanwhile, Lloyd's keycard records showed he returned to his room around 3:25 in the morning, raising questions about the nature of his interaction with Jennifer. The investigation also focused on 3 additional individuals who had become involved with George and Jennifer that evening. Greg and Zach Rosenberg, cousins, along with their friend Rusty, were Russian Americans living in New York with American passports. These 3 men had also spent time with the couple during the evening's activities. Jennifer had played poker with 19-year-old Greg, while the others remained with George and Josh at different areas of the casino and disco. The group's excessive drinking became problematic enough that the ship's crew made the decision to cut them off from alcohol service due to their disruptive behavior. Critical evidence emerged about an absinthe smuggling operation. The 3 Russians had purchased the highly potent alcohol, containing 40 to 70% alcohol content, during their stop in Greece. George had helped them sneak the bottle aboard the ship by hiding it in his pants. Crew members, including the cleaner, witnessed all 5 men drinking the dangerous absinthe together. The night concluded with Jennifer in an extremely intoxicated state after 2:30 in the morning. Security footage showed her staggering and being helped by the ship's cleaner. Most disturbingly, witnesses observed a physical altercation between Jennifer and George before she left the disco. But as Jennifer was being wheeled unconsciously to her cabin, witnesses were about to hear sounds from room 9062 that would haunt them forever. Jennifer's journey back to cabin 9062 revealed several bizarre details that would become crucial to understanding the timeline of George's disappearance. Around 3:30 in the morning, the ship's cleaner helped Jennifer to the elevator, as she was too intoxicated to navigate on her own. Despite cabin 9062 being located to the left of the elevator on deck 7, Jennifer went in the opposite direction, turning right instead. She eventually was found asleep in the hallway, far from her intended destination. Her level of intoxication was so severe that a female officer and 2 security guards had to transport her to her room using a wheelchair. The timing of Jennifer's arrival at the cabin was critical to the investigation. When Jennifer and the guards entered cabin 9062 just before 5 o'clock in the morning, the room was completely quiet with the curtains fully closed. There was no indication that anything unusual had occurred inside the room. However, the couple staying in the adjacent cabin provided testimony that revealed the true horror of what had transpired earlier. They reported being awakened by disturbing sounds coming from cabin 9062, including yelling, moving furniture, footsteps, and rustling. Most significantly, they heard a loud thud that seemed to indicate something or someone had fallen. These sounds occurred before 4 o'clock in the morning, which was before Jennifer was wheeled into the cabin. The timing was crucial, because it meant that whatever happened to George occurred while Jennifer was still unconscious in the hallway, being cared for by ship security. The couple was so concerned about the disturbance that they reported it to guest services. The man even made the decision to open his door and step into the hallway to investigate the commotion. When he looked outside, he witnessed 3 men standing in the corridor, though he was unable to identify them due to the lighting conditions. Multiple passengers and witnesses heard the woman scream and the noticeable thud sound that seemed to come from the direction of cabin 9062. These testimonies corroborated each other, painting a clear picture of a violent incident occurring in the early morning hours. The most chilling detail that emerged from witness testimony was that no woman was seen inside cabin 9062 during these events. Witnesses observed 4 men entering the room, but only 3 men were seen leaving after the disturbing incident concluded. This discrepancy became a focal point of the investigation, as everyone became interested in this critical fact. The key questions that emerged from this testimony were haunting. Did George meet his fate before Jennifer was wheeled into the room? Was he with the 3 Russian men he had met at the casino? Did George fall by accident, or was he pushed? The investigation would soon focus on those 3 men, and what they discovered about their activities that night would reveal a sinister pattern that went far beyond a simple accident. The investigation intensively focused on Greg, Zach Rosenberg, and Rusty, 3 individuals whose presence in George's final hours became increasingly significant. Key evidence emerged from George's electronic keycard records, which provided an indisputable timeline of events. At approximately 4:05 in the morning, all 3 men had used their access to enter cabin 9062. This timing correlated perfectly with witness testimony from the couple next door, who had observed 3 men in the hallway before they departed to another location. The electronic evidence provided concrete proof that these individuals were present during the critical time period when the disturbance occurred. Investigators developed 2 leading theories about what happened to George Smith IV during those early morning hours. The first theory, which many considered to make the most logical sense, involved a robbery that had gone terribly wrong. Evidence suggested that Zach, Greg, and Rusty may have been targeting wealthy travelers throughout the cruise. Their pattern appeared to involve getting potential victims extremely drunk and gaining their trust in order to steal valuable items from them. This theory was supported by several factors, including Jennifer's expensive engagement ring and the very costly watch she had given George as a gift. Multiple witnesses described how George and Jennifer had openly bragged about their wealth during the cruise, carrying tens of thousands of dollars with them and displaying expensive jewelry and accessories. This ostentatious display of wealth may have made them attractive targets for individuals looking to commit theft. Physical evidence in the cabin strongly supported the robbery theory. The room was found in complete disarray, suggesting someone had thoroughly searched for money and valuables. Most significantly, investigators discovered 2 red marks on the bedsheets that forensic analysis determined were caused by someone forcefully pulling George's watch from his wrist. The three men's strategy appeared to involve deliberately plying George and Jennifer with excessive amounts of alcohol and absinthe to incapacitate them for the robbery. The dangerous absinthe, with its extremely high alcohol content, would have been particularly effective in rendering victims helpless. The second theory suggested a strange accident involving men who had become so intoxicated that their judgment was completely impaired. This scenario involved George potentially falling overboard while trying to orient himself, with no one present being sober enough to save him or even fully comprehend what was happening. However, since the absinthe was purchased in Europe, where strict regulations ensure safe levels of thujone and other dangerous compounds, this accidental theory appeared less likely based on the available evidence. The FBI became heavily involved in the investigation, focusing their efforts on interviewing everyone who had been with George and Jennifer during that terrible night. Polygraph tests were administered to key individuals, with Jennifer passing her examination while Josh failed his. The most damning evidence emerged when investigators discovered a videotape featuring the three Russians making jokes about the incident. On the recording, they could be heard saying, "We taught him how to paraglide without a parachute," and repeatedly stating, "We never saw him. That's it." The FBI's 2009 interrogation of the four men would reveal disturbing inconsistencies and silence. But one man's cryptic admission would prove prophetic in the most sinister way. In 2009, the FBI conducted detailed questioning of Josh, Zach, Greg, and Rusty, seeking to uncover the truth about George's disappearance. The interrogations revealed a pattern of evasiveness and silence that frustrated investigators at every turn. Zach and Josh proved particularly uncooperative during their questioning sessions. Both men repeatedly invoked their Fifth Amendment rights, refusing to provide testimony that might incriminate them. Their silence was deafening, especially given the serious nature of the investigation and their known presence during George's final hours. Greg emerged as the only individual among the four who showed any willingness to provide information to investigators. However, even his account lacked the clarity and detail that investigators desperately needed to understand what had occurred in cabin 9062. When asked to explain why he and his companions were present in George's cabin during the early morning hours, Greg offered a puzzling explanation. He claimed they were there to order room service, a statement that raised immediate questions among investigators. The absurdity of Greg's room service claim became apparent when investigators considered the ship's protocols. The cruise ship staff had been specifically instructed not to serve the men anything else that night due to their disruptive behavior and excessive intoxication. This prohibition appeared to include food service, making Greg's explanation highly implausible. Greg's inability to provide specific details about the alleged room service order further undermined his credibility. He could only say that it was ordered at some point, without being able to identify who placed the order or what was requested. Despite his scattered and incomplete account, Greg made one statement with complete certainty. Everyone involved was extremely intoxicated that night. The level of alcohol consumption among all parties was so severe that it impaired everyone's judgment and memory. However, Greg made one definitive statement that sent chills through investigators. He declared with absolute certainty that whatever happened to George was not an accident. This statement contradicted any theory that George's death was the result of misadventure or accidental circumstances. In a cryptic comment that would prove prophetic, Greg told investigators that something crazy had happened that terrible night, something that would soon be discovered. However, he refused to elaborate further on what this discovery might be or when it would occur. The investigation took a shocking turn when Greg wouldn't live long enough to help the FBI uncover the truth. In December 2019, Greg's body was discovered in his car in front of his house. He had been shot multiple times at close range, and his murder remains unsolved to this day. The timing of Greg's death, occurring after his statement about George's case being discovered soon, created a chilling coincidence. The convenience of this timing suggested that Greg's murder could not simply be dismissed as unrelated to his knowledge of George's case. As the investigation stalled, the Smith family's desperate search for answers would lead them to make decisions that revealed just how far they would go to find justice for their son. The Smith family's world shattered when they received the devastating phone call informing them that George had likely gone overboard from the cruise ship. The shock and disbelief were overwhelming, as they struggled to comprehend how their son could simply disappear while on his honeymoon. The unique horror of having a child disappear on a different continent, probably in very deep ocean water, created a nightmare scenario for the family. Unlike other tragic situations where families can at least recover their loved one's remains, the Smiths faced the terrible reality that George's body might never be found. Refusing to accept the lack of progress in the investigation, The family immediately pressured police to solve the case quickly and provide justice for George. They understood that time was critical in gathering evidence and interviewing witnesses while memories remained fresh. Demonstrating their desperation and determination to find answers, the Smith family made the significant decision to offer a $100,000 reward for any information about George's whereabouts. This substantial sum reflected both their financial resources and their unwavering commitment to discovering the truth. The family's frustration with Royal Caribbean International led them to make a powerful statement by boycotting the cruise line entirely. They believed the company showed an apparent lack of interest in discovering what happened to George, prioritizing corporate interests over passenger safety and family concerns. Their anger was justified by the cruise line's troubling behavior in the aftermath of George's disappearance. Royal Caribbean appeared more concerned with keeping the incident quiet than with cooperating fully in the investigation. Most disturbing was their decision to clean up cabin 9062, which could have been a crucial crime scene, within hours of George's disappearance. The Smith family suspected that the cruise line's actions were motivated primarily by a desire to avoid bad publicity, rather than a genuine concern for discovering what happened to their son. This corporate response added insult to the injury of their devastating loss. Initially, the Smith family harbored suspicions about Jennifer's behavior and potential involvement in George's disappearance. They found her demeanor too calm, cool, and collected for someone whose husband had just vanished. Her decision to go to the spa the next morning instead of searching for her husband particularly troubled them. However, alternative explanations for Jennifer's behavior emerged during the investigation. Her severe hangover from the previous night's excessive drinking may have impaired her judgment and awareness. Additionally, investigators noted that she might not have noticed the blood on the sheets while getting dressed due to her physical and mental state. Despite these considerations, the Smith family maintained their belief for years that Jennifer was the main suspect. Her reluctance to discuss the case publicly reinforced their suspicions, although Jennifer defended her silence by explaining that the FBI had instructed her not to speak to the press. While expert analysis was being suppressed, the FBI's investigation would continue for several more years, only to reach a conclusion that would devastate the Smith family and leave more questions than answers. Frustrated by the lack of progress in the official investigation, the Smith family made the decision to hire renowned forensic scientist Henry Lee to help them understand what happened to their son. Lee's expertise and reputation gave the family hope that scientific analysis might reveal answers that had eluded law enforcement. Despite the limited availability of new evidence years after George's disappearance, Henry Lee was able to conduct several important tests in cabin 9262. His scientific approach focused on analyzing the physical evidence that remained available, particularly the balcony area where George presumably went overboard. Lee's examination included careful measurements of the balcony height and railing dimensions. These measurements were crucial to understanding whether George's fall could have been accidental or required external force. The forensic analysis considered factors such as George's height, weight, and the physics involved in falling from the balcony. After completing his analysis of the balcony height and railing measurements, Lee reached a significant conclusion. He determined that George's fall was not an accident, meaning that George would have had to be pushed with considerable force to fall off the railing into the ocean below. However, Lee's scientific integrity required him to acknowledge alternative possibilities. He admitted that he couldn't definitively rule out the scenario that George was so severely intoxicated that he lost awareness of his actions, lost his balance, and went overboard without any external intervention. The strange positioning of the chair found against the glass railing and the hip mark discovered at the scene provided potential evidence supporting an accidental fall theory. These physical markers suggested that someone extremely intoxicated might have used the chair to climb onto the railing and subsequently lost their balance. Lee recognized that intoxicated individuals have fallen from open windows and balconies many times throughout history, making this scenario plausible despite the physical challenges involved. Nevertheless, most people who studied this case believed there was much more to the story than just an accident. Lee planned to conduct a recreation of the fall using a dummy to test whether the blood evidence found on the ship's canopy supported the accident theory or the murder theory. This experiment could have provided crucial scientific evidence about the circumstances of George's death. However, Royal Caribbean International intervened and refused to allow the recreation experiment to proceed. This corporate obstruction prevented potentially valuable scientific testing that might have resolved questions about George's death. Most frustratingly, Henry Lee's complete case results were kept secret. so the public never learned what he discovered during his comprehensive examination of the cabin and balcony. Nearly 2 decades later, one family continues their search for truth while the world moves on, but some wounds never heal. The FBI's investigation continued for several more years, focusing on Josh, Greg, Zach, and Rusty as potential suspects in George's disappearance. Despite extensive efforts and resources devoted to the case, investigators ultimately failed to gather sufficient evidence to bring charges against any of the individuals involved. Over time, the Smith family eventually cleared Jennifer of responsibility in their minds. The evidence and investigation had not supported their initial suspicions about her involvement in George's death. This shift in their thinking represented a significant change from their earlier position. The legal resolution of the case involved a lawsuit against Royal Caribbean International, which was eventually settled. The settlement amount was slightly higher than initially reported, totaling $1.3 million. This sum was split between the Smith family and Jennifer, providing some financial compensation for their tremendous loss. The FBI's investigation spanned nearly a decade, continuing until 2015 when federal authorities finally reached their conclusion. After years of interviews, evidence analysis, and investigative work, they determined there wasn't enough evidence to move forward with criminal charges in the case. The official ruling was devastating for the Smith family. After all their efforts and years of hoping for answers, George's death was officially classified as an accident. This determination meant that no criminal activity was found to have caused George's disappearance and presumed death. The timeline was significant. George hadn't been seen or heard from since January 7, 2015, marking almost 10 years since his disappearance from the cruise ship. The decade-long investigation had consumed enormous resources, but ultimately failed to provide the answers the family desperately sought. The consequences of the FBI's decision were far-reaching. Josh, Zach, Greg, and Rusty were no longer considered suspects or even persons of interest in George's case. They were free to move on with their lives without the shadow of this investigation following them. The harsh reality remained that neither the FBI nor the Turkish government knew where George's body was located. The Mediterranean Sea had kept it secret for over a decade, and the chances of recovery grew more remote with each passing year. With the ocean covering 70% of Earth's surface, and 20 years having passed since George went missing, there was almost no chance his body would ever be found. This reality represented a particularly cruel aspect of the family's ongoing grief. The Smith family's reaction to the FBI's decision was one of shock and disgust. They felt betrayed by a system they had trusted to find justice for their son. Their Facebook post announced their intention to take George's case to the FBI office in New York, demonstrating their continued fight for answers. This represented the right course of action, as the family deserved answers, while acknowledging the devastating reality that crucial evidence was gone forever. The endless search continues for a family that refuses to give up hope for truth and justice. Nearly 20 years after George Smith IV disappeared from the MS Brilliance of the seas, his family continues their heartbreaking search for answers. The passage of time has not diminished their need to understand what happened to their beloved son and brother during those tragic early morning hours in July 2005. The Smith family faces a particularly torturous form of grief that distinguishes their situation from other tragic losses. While acknowledging there's no way to bring George back, they desperately need closure to move forward with their lives. The uncertainty surrounding his fate has created a suspended state of mourning that has lasted for 2 decades. The additional pain caused by George's body never being found compounds their suffering exponentially. This absence of physical remains creates an especially difficult form of grief, leaving the family unable to properly mourn or find peace. Without a grave to visit or remains to lay to rest, their healing process remains incomplete. The family continues living in fear and desperately searching for answers 24 hours a day. Their dedication to finding the truth has become a consuming force in their lives, affecting every aspect of their daily existence. Despite the official ruling of accidental death, they maintain their belief that the real truth remains hidden. The difficulty they face in finding peace without knowing what happened to their son represents one of the most challenging aspects of unresolved cases. The lack of definitive answers creates a unique form of ongoing trauma that affects not just the immediate family, but extends to friends and community members who loved George. Their perseverance in seeking justice is both admirable and heartbreaking. The Smith family's refusal to give up demonstrates the enduring power of a parent's love, even in the face of overwhelming challenges and official conclusions that contradict their beliefs. While official investigations may close and the world moves on, a family's need for answers never truly ends. Some cases, despite official conclusions, continue to demand attention and investigation from those who refuse to accept that justice has been served. The search for truth about George Smith IV's disappearance continues, honoring his memory and the family's unwavering love.